Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and this video is on the vexed topic of immigration. Well, not so long ago it was a political hot potato, so people didn't want to criticise it at all, and if they did, they were vociferously denounced. Now it's more openly debated. Some people are still lambasted for saying it ought to be restricted, and then there's some demagogues who'll exploit the issue to heighten xenophobic feeling and play on people's fears and things like that. So I think people should turn down the temperature on this issue. It's something which is vital and well worth discussing. And it doesn't have to be an issue which public opinion is bifurcated over. There's this false dichotomy that either you must have no restrictions on immigration whatsoever, or else you must have no immigration at all. It's really not like that. So it's a multifaceted issue, as well as there being more than 2 points of view. Well, first of all, what is immigration? And this is where it gets really complicated, because immigration is obviously moving from one country to another, which begs the question, what's a country? Like, look at the United Kingdom. Is that one country or four? Or some would say 3.25, because Irish nationalists regard Northern Ireland as being the fourth lost green field. Well, 3.25, I should say, or perhaps 3.25 more accurately, since Northern Ireland's about a fifth of the Irish landmass. My point is that there is no universally agreed definition of what a country is. So if an English woman moves to Scotland, is she an immigrant? I've known whites from other parts of the UK moving to Scotland being regarded as immigrants and so on. My native land, the Republic of Ireland, there is quite a bit of immigration now, but it's not a contentious issue because we have about the right level. We had mass emigration until 20 years ago. Let me see. It obviously touches on identity and on the nation state and things like that. So immigration is nothing new. It's been going on since the dawn of time. The Homo sapiens, we first emerged in the Rift Valley in Africa 3 million years ago. And we gradually spread out from there, and the human race gradually divided, and that's why we have very different phenotypes, as you can find people's the amount of melanin people have in their skin or hair and their eye color and so on, or some sort of facial features, why people are sometimes instantly recognizable as falling into one category or another. And how many categories are there? It's a moot point. And obviously, some people straddle two or more racial categories. And what defines a race? Well, there's no clear answer to that one either. But nation states are usually based around an ethnicity, and we obviously always had immigration, as I said. Now, until the last couple of centuries, if people did immigrate, they'd usually go to an adjacent country, just go across the land or across a short stretch of sea. But then in more recent centuries, people were able to sail to the far side of the world, and in the last century or so, fly to the furthest corner of the world. So although immigration is nothing new, what's new about it is the scale of it and the speed of it, and people arriving not from neighbouring countries, but from the far side of the globe. And most countries say that if you come legally and you live in our country for a set number of years and you pass a citizenship test, showing that you've mastered our language and so forth, you don't have a serious criminal record, you can be granted citizenship. So that's that. So there can be a difference between ethnicity and citizenship. Maybe ethnicity doesn't matter, but that's what it is. That's why, let's say, they're black British people or British Pakistanis and so on, or I'm just trying to think of any sort of counterexamples, why they're white Kenyans, for instance, or they're black Russians. All right, so even those who don't gain citizenship have residency. Now, some countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia have got this guest worker idea that you can live there for decades to work, but have no option to gain citizenship. In the UAE, if you are a Sunni Muslim and absolutely fluent in Arabic, actually I think you can after decades if you pay a lot of money. So that's that. And sometimes people even born in the UAE, for instance, even though families have been there for generations, they're not eligible for citizenship. So we obviously need to monitor and control immigration. It's not all a bad thing. Now, people who are liberal and left-wing tend to be cheerleaders for immigration. And indeed, it can be laudable. I suppose it's as good as the immigrant. And being an immigrant's not a bad thing to be. It can be a very honourable thing to be. Arguably, I've been an immigrant several times. Guest worker might be more accurate. Some people say expatriate, and some people say this is the ridiculous thing. If Westerners go to another country or a non-Western country, they almost say they're an expatriate and they think that's high status. Whereas someone's an immigrant, people sneer at that as though it's something to be ashamed of, which is preposterous. Well, it isn't. And obviously, almost everybody's immigrant status somewhere along the line. You look at in the UK, people who are white English, almost inevitably they will have had ancestors from somewhere like Denmark in the 9th century AD, or Normandy in the 11th century, things like that. You might say, well, that's different. That's very long ago, and also that's from a kindred country in the region, which hints at some racial bias there, saying, oh, well, it's okay if they're white, but not if they aren't. Anyway, so why can immigration be a laudable and a desirable thing? Well, there are labour shortages, particularly in certain sectors. And let's say the United Kingdom, from the 1950s onwards, there was mass emigration, well, more people going out than were coming in. And there were shortages of people to work in certain areas, particularly the NHS. So the UK government invited people, particularly from the Caribbean countries, to work in the NHS, for instance. That's National Health Service, the London Underground, things like that. Factories advertised in the Republic of Ireland. So skills shortages. So people who are qualified in certain areas or willing to work in certain areas come, and that's a boon to the economy. And just that's that. And people say, oh, well, it leads to diversity. Now, this can be a desirable thing. I mean, uniformity doesn't have to be terrible. But all right, society was a bit more bland and monochrome in the old days. Like there was over 200 years ago, the first Indian restaurant was founded in the United Kingdom. Apparently in 1950, there were about 4 of them in the UK. So immigration can be a good thing. And there have been some economic studies concluding that immigrants actually are net contributors to revenue. So who should be let in? Well, I suppose one would need to do a needs assessment. What do we need in terms of workers? We need, this number of dentists and that number of train drivers and this number of waitresses or whatever, and a lot immigration places accordingly. Now, if someone comes and he or she wishes to bring a spouse and children, I think it'd be inhuman not to allow them to do so, especially Conservative politicians who usually bang on about family values. Now, Enoch Poll would say a family can be reunited in 2 directions, as in this man or woman can go back to his or her country of origin to unite the family, which is true, but I think it would be unreasonable to deny that person being with his or her family. Chain migration, it doesn't have to be a dreadful thing. I can understand why it happens. So he moves to another country, she asks the sister to come, the sister asks a friend to come, the friend gets married and someone from the old country comes out, he invites his cousin, who invites his mate, who invites his niece, and that's chain migration, inviting more and more and more people. Because put yourself in the shoes of an immigrant going to an unfamiliar country. If there's somebody you know, a relative, a friend, someone of your nationality, someone who speaks your language, it's a lot less daunting, it's easier to cope, and that's why people cluster, feel more comfortable in that sort of situation. And then they're accused of ghettoizing. They don't assimilate. The trouble is, they do assimilate. Are they taking over or whatever, or polluting the culture, as some bigots would see it? So we shouldn't let in, obviously, just anybody. Maybe I shouldn't be let in to various countries. And there's also a question of numbers. Immigration can be a good thing, but it's foolish to pretend it's an unmitigated boon. There are downsides to it. Like, look at the UK. It had net 350,000 people coming into the UK per annum. So that means some people were going out, all right? So that'd be minus whatever it is, plus all the people coming in. And the totality of that was plus 350,000 to the population. The UK population, 65 million. And then it puts pressure on services like the NHS and schools. And yes, it's true that some immigrants work in the NHS, and that's tremendous, or become teachers, and that's very laudable as well. But, there's on housing capacity. And more of immigration is not evenly spread. There are places in County Durham with, houses to buy for 20,000 quid, with whole streets which are empty, and there's mass unemployment. If immigrants went there particularly, filled up the relatively empty places, that'd be okay, but largely they cluster in the overcrowded cities, like London, Birmingham, Glasgow. Now, I don't blame these people. These are where the job opportunities are. Often they have friends or relatives to go there. Obviously, if people come legally, they're absolutely entitled to live wherever they wish. But, we complain about traffic jams, we complain about overcrowding on the tube. An immigrant person, he's not bad for taking the train or driving on the road, but it necessarily puts pressure on the system. So that's one of the reasons why it should be reduced. There are all sorts of reasons. Build more housing. Okay, but you're going to have to concrete over the green space. Is that what you want? It drives up house prices. There are several factors why house prices are going up. I mean, Margaret Thatcher selling off the council houses, not building enough housing, things like that. Allowing overseas investors to buy houses they're never going to live in, giving out mortgages too easily. But there are several reasons, but one of them is excessive immigration. So I don't know what the magic number is, but I would say rather less than 350,000. I had heard an extremist on this chap, and he said we should have absolutely no immigration whatsoever into the United Kingdom. I said, what about an American business executive working for a multinational? His company wants to transfer him to the London office. You wouldn't allow him in? And he was going to make an exception on that one. But there are decent reasons to want to limit immigration, and there are ones which are very indecent, like Alan Sugar in one of his plays, A Chip in the Sugar. There's this old woman who's saying, oh, unemployment is not caused by Thatcher, it's caused by the blacks. So there are some racist people who'd scapegoat immigrants for anything. And even if these people are British citizens, even if their great-grandparents came over. So these people, they give caution on immigration a bad name. And so there is some myth-making saying, oh, they're taking our jobs. Well, obviously they're allowed to take jobs. If people come in legally, they're allowed to seek a job. And they might be more highly qualified and willing to work for a lower wage and things like that. And if you're a real free market fundamentalist, you'd say, well, let's have a free market in terms of labour and have no limitations whatsoever on who can come in, make it a free-for-all. I remember teaching a class of Koreans in the UK and putting it to them, should we just lift immigration controls in every country in the world? We're all human. Anybody can go anywhere, anytime to work and live as long as they want. And saying, well, no, it wouldn't, because obviously there'd be a huge number of people coming to the wealthier countries, and that would make the quality of life much worse. This brain drain would wreck some less developed countries and things like that. But wouldn't it even out because of the wealthier countries are then overcrowded and life gets dreadful, more people move out, and in the end it would even out? Well, I'm not so sure, but it would take a very long time for the dust to settle if that did happen. So there's some anti-immigrant rhetoric saying, oh, they have diseases, blah, blah, blah. Well, obviously you can have diseases in any country, some of which are communicable. But it is true in certain parts of the world, some contagious diseases are more prevalent than in, say, the Republic of Ireland or the UK. It doesn't make sense necessarily someone bad to have a disease, and they can be passed on and blah, blah, blah. You could say we're not allowing people in who are HIV positive or something. Not that anyone is bad for having that disease, and they all deserve sympathy. I would wish no one would have that disease, and they'd all get antiretrovirals. But you've got to be realistic. There's only so much money in the NHS, for instance, to treat these things. You have to make some tough choices, the priorities. You can't afford to treat everyone. Now, if I was suffering from that disease and I knew I could get free treatment in the UK, would I go? Yeah, sure I would. Saying, oh, they're criminals. And okay, there are criminals there of every nationality, including some people who are immigrants. I do think it's a rather small number. So there can be some alarmist rhetoric on this issue, which I think is unhelpful and does lead to a spike in racist sentiment. Like Nigel Farage, someone I used to have a lot of respect for, saying Romanian crime wave. And yes, there are Romanian criminals, and it could be that there are a higher percentage of that nationality than some others. But that's not most Romanians. Many Romanians are victim of this kind of thing. And that tends to increase anti-Romanian prejudice. I knew a Romanian child who was hit in school for being Romanian. Then the boy who hit him told him that's why. Now, Farage didn't tell anyone to hit a Romanian child, but his sort of irresponsible rhetoric indirectly encourages that kind of bullying. So there ought to be some limit, and I don't know what it is. I'm not a statistician. David Blunkett was asked this years ago to Home Secretary. He could see no obvious upper limit to the number of immigrants per year. 500,000 to the UK? 1 million? 2 million? 10 million? No limit? Really? Surely there's got to be some sort of limit. Immigrants can be many splendid people, so they're not all terrible, but they're not all wonderful either. So they're just ordinary people who'd like a higher quality of life and more money and so on. Obviously accused of playing the benefit system. I suppose very few people do that, as do British citizens as well. So some of them, they're taking our jobs, that's terrible. They're getting benefits, that's terrible. Well, I think not many of them are claiming benefits, and some people are getting jobs, which they're allowed to do. It doesn't make them bad. And obviously, society would find it difficult to function without any immigration at all. But then it's preposterous to pretend that immigration is entirely positive, that no immigrant has ever been a bad person, or that there are no difficulties associated with immigration. So diversity can make society more colourful in every sense, a bit more varied. All right, that can spice up life and so on. but one perhaps doesn't want to demean the indigenous culture too much. And obviously cultures are not hermetically sealed. They transmit and receive influences from each other. There's constantly a cultural dialogue going on, and it's not as though somebody solely belongs to one culture blurs into the next. Someone can belong to two or more cultures. So I think immigration policy would limit the number of people who can come in, and with Brexit, not automatically allow people from the EU in. And so, do we need this person or not? Trouble is, I don't want to be too much of a bureaucratic nightmare. It can be Kafkaesque. I've met Britishers married to Americans, and to be allowed to go to the United States, there's such a palaver to go through, just mountains of paperwork to fill. This from a country which is supposed to believe in small government. Or my British friend who was studying at the University of Michigan, and it was terrible. And having to give blood tests, and it couldn't be any hospital, it had to be this hospital, it all had to be done within so many days, or start the process all over again. Whereas Britishers bringing their American spouses into the UK was almost a formality. Certainly it was in Bill Bryson's day. One thing, if we're going to have an immigration policy, then it has to be enforced and stop people coming in illegally. Those who come in as tourists or whatever, if they overstay, have to be removed. Otherwise, we don't have an immigration policy, and deport people who stayed illegally. All right, and that's that. And it's a little bit tough, and the legal process is so lengthy and time-consuming, and very often they're allowed to stay, even if they are not. Don't have a claim to asylum. Often they're claimed asylum, but they ought to go to their nearest country, not go through a dozen safe countries coming to the UK. I suppose because it's Anglophone, because there are no compulsory ID cards, because it's wealthier, all sorts of reasons. So immigration and asylum are not the same issue, but they do overlap. Anyway, I could go on about this all day. So this is my take on immigration. Try to avoid inflammatory rhetoric, nevertheless to discuss it frankly and not pretend that immigration is entirely an absolutely wonderful thing, nor is it all bad by any means. So I can politely disagree with someone and realize there are many levels of immigration, and one doesn't have to have a completely open door policy in order to be a morally upstanding person.